The Mecklenburg County ABC Law Enforcement Division provides a free training program to ABC permitted establishments called the Alcohol Seller and Server Excellence Training to educate employees on the possession and sale of alcohol. This ABC officer training covers underage sales, forms of acceptable identification, and employee age requirements. The Mecklenburg County ABC Board, more than a bottle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Troutman, your co-host for Good Morning BT on WBT 1110 AM 99.3 FM. And welcome to Radio 1 Charlotte's Community Mental Health Series in partnership with the Mecklenburg County Alcoholic Beverage and Control Board. Now, this is a space where you will find hope, resources, and assistance. And each month we have discussed topics for you, our listeners, that can affect your overall mental and behavioral health. Now, for this series, we're going to discuss social media and your mental health. And here to help us answer questions surrounding social media and your mental health, we have a very special guest who will provide us with the toolboxes that we need for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our friends. And joining me today, I'm thrilled to welcome Juliet Kuehnle, owner and founder of Sun Counseling and Awareness. Sorry, I should say that again. Sun Counseling and Wellness. I am unaware right now. Welcome. So thank you so much for joining us today, Juliet.
I'm excited to be here and have this conversation. It's so important. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Now, let me say the name of your company again, since I butchered it right there. Sun Counseling and Wellness. Tell us a little bit about your organization and what it is that you do, what you focus on, and how you help folks.
Sure. Thank you. So yes, I own actually two businesses. The one is my group mental wellness practice, Sun Counseling and Wellness, and we have 10 mental health clinicians, a registered dietitian, and an integrative wellness provider. So we treat all ages, most presenting concerns. We try to be able to say yes to holistic wellness, mind, body, and spirit. And we're located in South Park, and we see also clients virtually in several states. So that is my my day job where I see clients individually and then run this group practice. And then my second business is called Yep, I Go to Therapy. And it's just my mission is to normalize and elevate the way we talk about mental health and to show up in where any space where I can to try to, further that conversation. And so much of that is around ending the stigma. So that business is my public speaking. I published a book. I have a podcast, sell therapy merchandise. I just try to be loud and proud about it. Yep, I go to therapy. I'm a therapist who goes to therapy. I think everyone should.
I love that so much. Yep, I go to therapy.
Yep.
I think you're right that we need to have open conversations about mental health, because I've always said that if you feel comfortable in your own skin when talking about things, then it inevitably makes other people feel comfortable in their own skin, which opens up conversation. And I think that's kind of what we're missing a lot of the times.
That's right. Vulnerability definitely begets vulnerability. And it's, the needle has moved since the pandemic, and we went through this collective trauma together. But that's really, I think, something that I'm trying to jump on to make it more of a momentum, a movement, if you will, so we can keep understanding that it's okay to not be okay, and we all have our stuff, and that we don't have to pretend and perform as much. And yeah, so we all have mental health and deserve to tend to it. And that is definitely my tagline.
Now, today we're focusing on mental health and social media. I would imagine in your practice, you've probably seen an uptick in how people are dealing with their own anxiety and depression and feelings of not good enoughness, all of the things that come with what social media brings to the table. What have you seen a big change because social media has become such a big part of everyone's lives, particularly young people's lives?
Right. I mean, it has truly fundamentally reshaped the mental health conversation in both positive and negative ways. So I think we are really just sort of beginning to understand how sharp both sides of that double-edged sword can be. It's given us really like a microphone for mental health. It's been a great opportunity for people to heal, connect, learn, but it can certainly also overwhelm and distort and distract us from real mental wellness and self-care. I think, again, a huge value in it is the visibility. Social media has been a powerful tool for what I was saying, normalizing these conversations around it. I mean, think about before the pandemic, so few people were openly talking about things like trauma, boundaries, therapy, anxiety. But now these terms are really part of the zeitgeist, if you will. There are hashtags like therapy is cool, mental health matters, that have billions of views across these platforms. So that's great, because now this information, this psychoeducation, is accessible to people who may not have ever walked into a therapist's office or have that opportunity. Populations that wouldn't have had that access have now exposure to certain tools and community. So there's a sense of belonging. There are certain marginalized communities where we know it has been a lifeline. LGBTQIA youth, people of color, neurodivergent folks, like this it's a real sense of community and belonging for people. And then the flip side is that we not only have, our real life relationships that we're navigating, but we have our digital selves that we have to navigate. And so it has really eroded authenticity in a lot of ways. We are now in kind of an always on culture where social media is really this like emotional hamster wheel where there's this pressure to post, perform, respond. It's relentless. There's no natural off switch. And we are really not wired to keep up with that. So there's a lot of also I talked about the education piece being so powerful, but there's also a lot of misinformation out there and people don't know to question it or to be conscious consumers of that. So this flood of mental health content is not always accurate. TikTok therapy can certainly be validating, but it also oversimplifies things. It doesn't account for people's nuances and specific diagnoses and things like that. So it's now become such a public trendy thing, but there's still so much to be conscious of as we navigate that.
As you take a look at social media, I love that you just brought up the positives. That's always great to showcase that there are good things. And I think when social media first became a thing that people were using as a tool, I think the majority of people felt it was a positive thing, a way to connect, a way to find people they had lost touch with. But like you said, at this point, we have also become it's just ubiquitous. It's something we don't have that off switch. And it's something, as we have our phones, that's kind of with us at all times. And we may all feel like we're performing. When you think about all of those negative aspects of it, what are some of the common mental health issues that you see that are linked to social media that people are coming to you for and that you can let our audience know about?
Yeah. So, it's what we're seeing with our clientele, but also there's been growing research that backs this, that high social media use is significantly associated with generalized anxiety symptoms. So I would say, people always ask me what's the thing I see most, the theme in all of our clients is it's anxiety. Scrolling exposes us to just this rapid influx of information, which is often, if you think about it, really emotionally charged. Like breaking news and, doom scrolling even. And so what this does, there's a neurobiological response here. It activates our brain's fear response. It really keeps us in this state of hypervigilance. We are, again, where we are always on, and our brains and our nervous systems were not truly wired to have to navigate that and deal with that. We're also seeing depressive symptoms. We know, especially like passive use of social media, so that like endless scrolling without interacting, that's linked to increased depressive symptoms. And also, the absence of real-time connection when people are spending all that time online can certainly exacerbate feelings of loneliness, inadequacy. We have to mention the impact on self-esteem with social media use. Definitely greater social media use correlates with lower self-esteem, especially in adolescence, as you mentioned. So there's this quest that we're on, even subconsciously, for the likes and the anything that could reinforce that our digital selves are good enough. And so our self-worth can become really contingent on that engagement, and so it can fluctuate with that online presence. And then there are some other specifics like body dissatisfaction, disordered eating. We're certainly seeing a lot of that with the intersection of social media and diet culture. There's so much content out there, that's just actually quite dangerous. Sleep disturbances for people. So of course that can be correlated to like late night scrolling and the blue light and emotional stimulation that interferes with, the melatonin production in our restful sleep. Attention and focus issues. We are also not meant to be doing as much like switching as we do. So that constant switching between apps the constant responding to notifications, this fragments our attention. And so, we're seeing a lot of impact on focus and attention as well.
Now, you mentioned that young people, certainly adolescents, are dealing with things like self-esteem, eating disorders. Are there certain demographics as well that you see an uptick in mental health issues that maybe you wouldn't have seen 15 years ago?
I mean, gosh, I say all the time, I'm so glad I didn't have this when I was growing up, right?
Me too, all the time.
Yeah. So think about that. So teens and young adults in particular are most at risk because of key developmental factors. So their brains are still developing, especially in areas that are tied to things like self-evaluation and impulse control and that social belonging. We know that the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that governs decision-making and emotion regulation and impulse control, that doesn't fully develop until we're 25 years old. And so think about these kids that are, that are subscribing to all of this. They're so much more susceptible to just the emotional highs and lows of this engagement. Again, especially when it comes to likes and follows and comments, and it's so tied to self-worth for them. And then girls in particular, but I also always say the caveat, definitely boys as well. But we know just through the research that girls face a particular, higher rate of social comparison and body image issues through the social media. But I think it's important to say that adults, even though our brains are fully developed, we're not immune. We know, again, in the research that millennials, for example, report higher rates of burnout and comparison fatigue. You think about like the parenting comparison that they're navigating on social media, financial pressure when they see these like curated, highlight reels of others. And then the like Gen X, the boomer generation, for them, the risk is often connected to that doom scrolling. So this is, again, that constant exposure to distressing news or misinformation or politically polarizing content. And this definitely fuels anxiety. So while the type of content that causes the distress may differ across age groups, the mechanism is similar.
So all of this is really what plays on this emotional and the psychological impact of social media, these things that trigger anxiety, these things that trigger depression and trigger low self-esteem across generations, but maybe just different kinds of content.
That's right. I mean, it's dopamine driven feedback loops, the heightened comparison, overstimulation for any of us, no matter what age group. It's overwhelming and overstimulating to our nervous systems, which is going to lead to dysregulation.
So what would you recommend, especially when it comes to social comparison? Like you were saying, young people, it may be body image, it may be diet culture, the fitness culture. With the older generations, it may be parenting, or like you said, the curated highlight reels of their homes and decor and vacations and that kind of thing. What kind of advice do you give folks on trying to break that cycle of comparison when it comes to, being constantly bombarded by all of these images?
That's right. Well, I mean, if you will, like, let's talk about what social comparison is truly in a psychological context, because I do want to validate that it is a natural human tendency to compare ourselves. It is its own form of survival. Since the beginning of time, we had to believe that we wouldn't, get kicked out of the tribe, right? So we naturally compare ourselves to others. So I want people to give themselves grace and some self-compassion around that.
I love that.
Yeah. But the thing is that social media just amplifies this, because again, those highlight reels, and that is so important to understand that like most things on there are filtered and polished and glowing. And so when we're already feeling somewhat dysregulated or insecure or whatever, we interpret that as real life. So there is such thing as, it's called social comparison theory. We measure our worth by comparing ourselves to others. And we do what's also called upward comparison. So we compare ourselves to people we perceive as better off. So that, of course, is a direct hit to our self-esteem, which spirals those feelings of inadequacy or failure. And so one, big advice is being able to just understand that, like, one, again, this is super it's natural that we do this. It's super understandable. And so being able to just catch it, though, we've got to be able to recognize like when our brains and bodies are getting into that. So do you have cues for you that you're getting stuck in that upward comparison loop? Like, do you start, does your inner critic get louder? Do you start getting anxious? What are your cues that you might be stuck in it? Can you curate your feed? I talk to people about this all the time. We have some agency over who we're following, And so curating your feed of the people that you follow, being very honest. If it doesn't feel good, unfollow, mute, block, whatever it is. Like, we sometimes feel like we have to follow back the people that follow us. If it doesn't feel good, you've got agency over it. So being a conscious consumer of your own feed to curate that can give you a little bit more agency over, controlling that response.
When it comes to social media, we're talking about the comparison aspect of it, but there's also, and I think especially, actually, it's not just young people, because I know plenty of people my age who have this kind of reward, the dopamine response that comes with the likes and the attention and the comments and the things that go along with posting a picture of your vacation or of something that you're doing, or a picture of something that's happening in your life. And this can often create a cycle that leads to what feels like, and for a lot of people is a social media addiction, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, these platforms are literally designed to be addictive. If you think about it, and they use the same principles as, slot machines. It's like intermittent variable rewards. Like, you never know when likes or comments are going to come. So it keeps you coming back for more. And then there is this dopamine feedback loop. So dopamine is the brain's feel-good chemical. The spikes when we get a like or a message, but also even just when we get a notification. So it might just be like the sound that you get an email, but you literally get a dopamine spike. And so we get hooked on that. And so when the reward is missing, let's say your post didn't perform as well as you thought, or there were no likes, or you're ghosted in a group chat or whatever, it leads to a true dip. It feels like rejection or failure. So this loop over time dysregulates our mood, increases our anxiety, because our brain starts to have been wired for that constant anticipation and evaluation. Did they see my story? Why didn't they respond? Was that not good enough? I mean, we get so hooked on seeking that dopamine and then taking it very personally if it doesn't match maybe those expectations.
So what do you recommend? Time limits on social media, or maybe getting rid of the push notifications, or how do you help folks deal with that dopamine reward system that is part of our natural biology, that was not necessarily intended for a social media response like this, but was part of our evolution?
That's right. Yes, I think anything we can do to create even micro moments of digital detox is great. So it is, I turn off notifications, just because you also know how tempting it is if you hear that sound or you see that push. Yeah. So again, this is the agency we have over it. So our devices are, again, positive, wonderful in so many ways, but we need to allow them to work for us. So things like designating phone-free zones even goes a long way. No phones at the meal table, no phones in the bedroom, like things like that sound so simple, but how many of us actually really follow that?
Right.
Being able to create some space to be able to be intentional, asking myself, like, why am I opening this app? Am I in the mental space to open this right now? And so some people will, move the like Instagram or whatever off of their home screen, and, or have set up screen limits so that it'll notify you, you've been on here 15 minutes. Sure, you can, dismiss that notification, but the idea is that it gives you a pause to check in to say, do I want to keep doing this? Sometimes people need a full detox. Like, we need to take some much more time off. It feels really good. It's scary at first because there's the whole FOMO thing, right, but taking time off from it. And then the idea is, of course we want dopamine. So we've got to know what else we can do to create natural dopamine response that has nothing to do with our devices. So what else is nourishing for you that's going to create some of these natural dopamine responses, like, physical exercise, connecting with other people in real life, things like that.
And what about this need, or this need people feel, and it's real because of all of the social pressures and the likes and the dopamine and all of these things play into that need, or that feeling that you must create a perfect social media image and then suddenly you've kind of you've formed your identity around this social media image that isn't necessarily real. I mean, if you go on to any of the streaming platforms, there are dozens of documentaries out there about these social media influencers who created this whole online world that's completely not real. And in the process, duped a lot of people and changed the way other people were thinking. And there's certainly a pressure to create this perfect image.
There is. And especially, I mean, people are monetizing that now. Yeah. So that fuels it as well. And, again, we are wired for connection. So even if it's this digital connection that feels good to us, and our brains can't necessarily differentiate between digital connection or digital rejection and real life connection, real life rejection. So social media feels so personal, even though we might know better. So I think it's the more, again, mindful, intentionally, we can be aware of what our true personal values are is a really good starting point. Because often that curated thing, let's say somebody has figured out the formula and they are an influencer and they've monetized it and it's that might be working. But even those values or the things that they sort of project in that digital self, those might not align with their real life personal values. So the more clarity we can have around what is actually at whatever season of life we're in, a value of ours and not societal value, family of origin value, social media value, we can anchor in that. We can keep coming back to that. I always think about values as a home base. Mm-hmm. And then we also have to have coping skills. I mean, this is such a therapist thing to say, but again, if we're in this fight or flight and this dopamine cycle and all of this self-protection and comparison and all of that, I mean, we have to be able to get really honest about that, clear about that, and then know how to cope. So what tools do we have to actually regulate our nervous system? What tools do we have to separate our worth, from that digital image, all of that. So that's where, sometimes if we can't do it on our own, where therapy comes in.
So some of the psychological consequences that come with seeking the likes or trying to become one of these social media influencers because people think they can monetize it, and then suddenly maybe not matching your online values with your real values. What can some of the psychological consequences of that be? Because if you have one personality here and then over here is who you really, really are, that split must become difficult. And I mean, I perform, on radio for a living. So I know that the performance nature of things can be difficult in those moments when you need or want to be quiet.
Oh, that's so right. So yeah, that's such an important awareness, that shift from potential authenticity to performance, and how that over time, that performance can become internalized. And maybe again, especially for those whose identities are shaky or still forming, like teens. So if we are building a sense of self based on what will get approval and validation, we are likely to have what psychologists call identity diffusion. So that disconnect that you're talking about between online self and real self. And so the further that those two selves drift apart, then we feel much less grounded. We feel much less known by others. And again, our greatest desire as humans is to belong. But so now we have this fractured sense of being known by others. So again, the impact on depression, anxiety, self-criticism, self-esteem, anytime our self-worth is conditional, it's risky, it's dangerous, because then we're not settled in who I am is enough. So we see a lot of imposter syndrome with that dissonance too. Maybe if people knew the real me, they wouldn't like me. We see a lot of social exhaustion, like you have to be on all the time to maintain maybe whatever that digital image is. And it's teens, it's adults, even just like LinkedIn personas. It's not just some of these other Instagram, TikTok, or the Pinterest aesthetic, whatever it is. If we define our value by our online identity, we definitely risk losing touch with, again, those inner values, that inner compass, that true sense of worth, just based on who we are.
When you and I were young, and like you said earlier in this conversation, you were saying, gosh, I'm so glad I didn't have social media. When I was young, I've said the same thing over and over again. And one thing that we did have was the Victoria's Secret catalogs. And we would see, Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues when we were young, and fashion models. And And there was certainly a diet or a thin culture that existed when we were young, but we weren't necessarily bombarded with it at every turn. And now on top of that, you're seeing, people talk about things like the diet medications, and people are pushing different kinds of appetite suppressant supplements. And I mean, not only is it just the body image part of it, but then there are all of these products now that are associated with it. And you talked about especially in young girls, eating disorder culture and body image dysmorphia. And talk to me a little bit more in detail about just this kind of 360-degree aspect of this, because it is, I know how I struggled as a young person, and I wasn't bombarded in quite the same way that young people might be now. And if you have a young person who comes to you, or has a parent who comes to you, what's the way that you begin talking about something as complex as this?
It is. I mean, gosh, it really is. How much time do we have?
I know.
I do often try to give people the foundational industry, that needs us to buy into the idea that our worth is tied to our weight, size, and shape. Mm-hmm. And so when we first understand that that is the air we breathe, no matter what gender we are, that is the air we breathe, then we maybe start to get a little room to decide, like, is that an actual, again, personal value of mine or not? So the issue too with, it used to just be like, just magazines and, at the checkout line and, whatever. So now it is definitely worsened because it's all really appearance-based content, and it's not just like filters and good lighting, but there are so many apps that can do literally anything, like change the shape of somebody or enhance features, or it's all digitally altered. And so many people don't even realize that. So when you see these things day after day, you start to internalize that as normal, expected. And then this harmful mental loop is created of, if that's what, pretty or healthy or whatever is supposed to look like, and I don't look like that, then something's wrong with me. So of course, then like body dissatisfaction. And then we have all those things of, here's how you take care of that, try this diet, try this medicine. And it is dangerous. I mean, eating disorders are the second highest mortality rate of any mental illness. So it's serious. And we also know there's not enough, barriers out there to some of these, dangerous hashtags, for example, that perpetuate like disordered eating and things like that. And so people are just consuming this appearance focused stuff. And it really is encouraging this like self-surveillance too, that is not natural, looking at ourselves through the imagined lens of others. Like, certainly, I guess we've done that in some, to some degree always, but not like this.
I know that it's really unhealthy, right? It's just, sure. It's really, our brains aren't we're not designed for this.
Sure. Yeah. And it's if you, it starts to become so distorted, and and it's hard to tell, what's reality. It's hard to separate, even content that's out there as, trying to sell itself as like fitspiration or health, whatever, but it's really about aesthetic perfection. And so body shame, compulsive exercise and eating behaviors, all of that gets fueled, if we don't understand how to be conscious consumers of that.
Now, I know that we are running out of time with this conversation, but I wanted to touch on one more thing before I let you go, and that is the issue of cyberbullying, something that's very real for a lot of people. For adults, it can be through a political lens. For young people, it could be all kinds of ways that they are cyberbullied by their peers. Talk to me a little bit about cyberbullying and what you see in your practices and your line of work.
Yeah. Ugh. Cyberbullying, it's inescapable is what's really hard about it. Like traditional bullying in the sense before all of the cyber stuff was, it might stop when school was over, or when we got to our bus stop. But with online harassment, there's really no off switch. So the bullying can follow us anywhere. So this for people has created a sense of hypervigilance, again, where that our nervous system becomes really braced for that next hit. It's important for people to understand how public and permanent cyberbullying is. So again, if someone says something in person, it might sting, but it's more fleeting. But online, that same comment can be screenshotted, shared, reposted, revisited over and over. So we can relive that humiliation or that hurt, ruminate on it. It can go viral in a worst case scenario, it's harder to confront, because it's often cyberbullying's often anonymous. People feel like they can hide behind the screen and get away with anything. So versus like in face-to-face interaction bullying, there are fake accounts online. There's just so much. It's just easier to be cruel without accountability, really. People are emboldened to do that. So, and then if you think about it again, for any age, but adolescents, if they're targeted online during, again, this time of identity formation, that really can create lasting trauma and a lasting negative core belief because they've internalized messages. And I think this can happen for any of us. And so, yeah, it's important to be able to, again, have tools to recognize if this type of thing starts to feel like it gets out of your control. If you are the target of something like this, again, what tools, what support do you have available to you to try to navigate something that can be very damaging?
I want to, and again, I wish I could talk to you all day. We could do this for 100 years. But let's end the conversation with, maybe a little bit of hope and some positive reinforcement on how people can set, good social media boundaries and understand within themselves or a loved one when social media might be affecting mental health.
Yeah, great. I wanted to talk about the signs. Yes. Because again, we're also caught up in it. So how do I know if it's a problem? I would love for people, I've said this a few different ways, different times, but to have an increased self-awareness around the impact this is honestly having on you. So if you recognize this dopamine loop and all of that, like, of course it feels good, but does it really? So if you're really aware of your mood, do you have mood drops after scrolling or seeing certain things? Are you having sleep disturbances? Are you having increased like inner critic and self-esteem thoughts, through comparing yourself constantly? Are you feeling irritable or anxious if you can't check your phone? That can be a sign again that you're hooked on this. Are you avoiding in-person interaction? I often say, like, are you moving kind of from your baseline of typical functioning? And if you can tell that if it's sort of tied to your use of, our phones, again, they can track for us how many hours we've been on certain apps. Use that data and then connect it with mood to try to get really clear on the actual impact it's having on you. And then know that you can start small. You don't have to quit cold turkey. I don't think that's realistic. Again, we talked about the benefits of some of this. So just maybe try things like, a no scroll morning routine, or again, like a phone free zone, muting or unfollowing triggering accounts, maybe a 24-hour challenge if you're feeling bold. And if you're feeling really stuck and hooked, then again, this is where a therapist might be able to help you process on, some of those deeper needs that might be keeping you hooked, like that validation or connection. Hopefully that's helpful.
And tell folks how they can get in touch with you, even through social media platforms, but how people might reach out to you for help.
Right. Let's use this for good. Yes. So most of my platform handles are Yep, I Go to Therapy. I'm most active on Instagram and LinkedIn. And my website is Yep, I Go to Therapy. And then, because I think you might find that some of the merch is fun and interesting. And I have a couple new card decks coming out that are like therapy on the go. So again, that accessibility is really important to me. And then again, our practice is sun, like the sun outside, sun counseling and wellness.
Well, Juliet, I just want to tell you, you're amazing and I love you. I just want to jump through the screen and hug you. This has been such an excellent conversation. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all of the information, and I know that you've helped a lot of people today.
Thanks for hosting this conversation. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course. And this is part of our community mental health series in partnership with the Mecklenburg County Alcoholic Beverage and Control Board. And if you or someone you know could benefit from the services provided by Juliet Kuehnle, she is the owner and founder, and I'm going to say it right, of Sun Counseling and Wellness. Please see her information. It's right here at the bottom of your screen right now. And in closing, another special thank you to the Mecklenburg County ABC Board for making all of this possible with our partnerships and providing the platform for our community mental health series. And for more information on Met County ABC Board's community outreach initiatives, please visit mecabc.com. Thanks for joining us, everybody.